A man's secrets are rarely safe, but Richard Sterling believed his were different. He believed they were insulated by billions of dollars, by the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean, and by the naivety of the beautiful young woman beside him. From their overwater bungalow in Bora Bora, the world seemed a distant, manageable thing. But a storm was coming, not of wind and rain, but of quiet, calculated fury. His wife, Vivian, was on her way, and in her carry-on was a single, unassuming passport, a document that would prove to be more devastating than any affair dismantling his empire, his identity, and his future, one secret at a time. The sun in Bora Bora didn't just shine. It drenched everything in a liquid gold that made the impossible seem mundane. From the deck of the overwater bungalow, Villa 107 at the Four Seasons, the most exclusive one. Of course, Richard Sterling watched the light dance on the turquoise lagoon. He swirled the 25-year-old Macallan in his crystal glass, the ice clinking a soft, satisfied rhythm. This was perfection. His perfection. Beside him, lounging on a pristine white chaise, was Chloe Vance. At 24, she was a masterpiece of the modern age, perfectly toned from Pilates, her skin flawlessly tanned, her blonde hair bleached by the sun and expensive salons into a cascade of effortless waves. She was scrolling through her phone, her thumb flicking expertly as she curated the story of their escape for her thousands of followers. A boomerang of her clinking her champagne flute against his whiskey glass. A filtered selfie with Mount Otamanu in the background, captioned, "Found Heaven." "They're going to lose their minds when they see this," she murmured, her voice a breathy whisper. "My agent said the St. Bart's photos got me that Dior campaign. This is on another level." Richard grunted a sound of vague approval. He wasn't interested in her followers or her agent. Chloe was an accessory, the most beautiful and currently most gratifying one he owned. She was a living, breathing testament to his power. He was 52, but with her on his arm, he felt 30 again. He felt vital. At home with his wife Vivian, he felt like a balance sheet. Measured, audited. Vivian. He pushed the thought away. She thought he was at a tech conference in Singapore. The trip had been meticulously planned. His private jet had dropped him in Singapore for a single verifiable meeting, then taken off for a maintenance check in Indonesia, while Richard took a chartered seaplane to French Polynesia. It was a clean, untraceable break. He had a 2-week window of absolute freedom. "Ricky, are you listening?" Chloe pouted, lowering her phone. "I was asking if we should have dinner on the beach tonight, or have the chef come to the villa." "Whatever you want, darling," he said, reaching over to run a hand down her arm. Her skin was warm, pliant. Unlike Vivian's, which always felt resistant, as if she were braced for something. Chloe was the opposite of Vivian in every conceivable way. Where Vivian was quiet, Chloe was loud. Where Vivian's beauty was in her sharp, intelligent eyes and classical bone structure hidden behind conservative cardigans, Chloe's was a dazzling, in-your-face spectacle. Vivian read financial reports for fun. Chloe read gossip columns for work. For 25 years, Vivian had been his partner, the silent architect of his empire. She'd managed their properties, vetted his investments, and smoothed over his social gaffes with a grace that made everyone forget his ruthless blue-collar origins. She was brilliant, indispensable, and utterly suffocatingly predictable. Chloe was a vacation from his life, a beautiful, temporary escape. He stood up, stretching his arms. I need to make a call. The Singapore deal is in its final stages. A few loose ends to tie up. Chloe's eyes lit up at the mention of the deal. She knew it was worth hundreds of millions. Of course, baby. Go be a titan of industry. She blew him a kiss and went back to her phone, probably crafting another post about her powerful, mysterious boyfriend. Richard stepped inside the villa, the cool air conditioning a welcome shock. He pulled out his satellite phone, the one Vivian couldn't track. He dialed his CFO, Marcus Thorne. Marcus. Status, Richard. It's complicated, Marcus said, his voice strained. The third tranche financing just hit a snag, a compliance flag from the bank in Zurich. They're asking for an updated source of funds declaration, and they want it cross-signed by the primary shareholder. Richard's grip tightened on the phone. The primary shareholder is me. No, Marcus said carefully. The primary shareholder of the holding company, Sterling Consolidated, is the Sterling Family Trust. The trust requires 2 signatories for a capital movement of this size. You and Vivian. Richard swore a low, guttural sound. He paced the cool marble floor of the villa. Of course. It was a fail-safe Vivian had insisted on years ago, after a risky venture nearly cost them everything. He'd seen it as a sign of her lack of faith in him. She'd called it prudent. Now her prudence was a leash yanking him back from across the globe. Just handle it, Marcus. Forge the signature. You've done it before. There was a pause. Not on a 9-figure deal, Richard. Not with Swiss regulators who are already on high alert. Vivian's signature is unique. The flourish on the E, it's impossible to replicate perfectly. If they flag it, the entire deal could be frozen, and we'd be under investigation. Frustration burned in his chest. He was Richard Sterling. He didn't get stopped by compliance flags and signatures. He built skyscrapers. He acquired companies. He bent the world to his will. Yet he was being thwarted by his wife's handwriting. Fine, he snapped. Tell them there's a delay. I'll handle Vivian when I get back. He hung up his mood, souring the paradise outside. He walked back onto the deck, the golden light now feeling garish and mocking. Chloe was looking at him, her smile faltering. Everything okay, Ricky? Just business, he said, his tone sharper than he intended. He poured himself another 3 fingers of whiskey. He needed to get her out of his hair to think. Why don't you go for a spa treatment? Get the pearl facial, the one you were talking about. My treat. Chloe, sensing his dark mood, brightened at the offer. Really? It's obscenely expensive. Nothing is obscenely expensive, he said, the arrogance returning to his voice. It was a shield. Go. I need to clear my head. She kissed his cheek and practically skipped off the deck, her phone already in hand to document the experience. Richard watched her go, then sank into the chaise, the whiskey doing little to calm the rage simmering within him. He was trapped by his wife, by his business, by the very Emma he had built to be free. He looked out at the horizon, at the endless blue, meeting the endless scum. He had come here to feel like a god, untouchable and omnipotent. For the first time in the midst of all this manufactured perfection, he just felt like a man on a very long leash. And he was starting to suspect the person holding it was about to give it a very hard pull. While Richard Sterling was chafing under the tropical sun, Vivian Sterling was in the heart of their empire, a cavernous, climate-controlled storage facility in a nondescript part of New Jersey. The air was cold and smelled of paper and preservation chemicals. This wasn't one of Richard's flashy offices in Manhattan. This was the company's nerve center, its memory. It housed 25 years of paper records, old deeds, original incorporation documents, blueprints and tax filings from before everything was digitized. Vivian, dressed in a simple grey cashmere sweater and tailored trousers, moved through the aisles of steel shelving with purpose. She wasn't weeping into a pint of ice cream or plotting revenge with her girlfriends over Chardonnay. Her grief had come and gone months ago, a silent, sharp storm that had passed, leaving behind a cold, hard clarity. The discovery hadn't been a cliché. There was no lipstick on a collar, no late-night text message. It was a number. A single recurring wire transfer of $50,000 a month, leaving one of their secondary accounts and going to a CV Designs Inc. She had been conducting a routine quarterly audit of their personal finances, something Richard had long since dismissed as her hobby when she saw it. It was sloppy, arrogant. He thought she wasn't looking anymore. Her first instinct was a dull, familiar ache. It wasn't the first time. She knew about the flight attendants in the early years, the real estate agent in London. She had always chosen to ignore them, convincing herself they were meaningless distractions from the real prize, the empire they were building, the legacy for their children, James and Olivia. She was the co-founder, the strategist, the one who saw the long game. She had traded passion for partnership, and for a long time it had seemed like a fair deal. But this felt different. $50,000 a month wasn't a fling. It was an investment, an allowance, a kept woman. A quick, discreet search by a private investigator confirmed it. Chloe Vance, a 24-year-old Instagram model. Vivian had looked at the girl's social media profile, a dizzying collage of luxury hotels, designer bags, and seductive pouts. It was all so cheap. It wasn't the infidelity that wounded her pride. It was his appalling taste. That discovery had been the loose thread, and Vivian, meticulous and patient, began to pull. She didn't confront him. She didn't cry. She dug. She hired a team of forensic accountants, not lawyers. She told them to look for more than just a mistress's allowance. She told them to look for the patterns of a man who believed he was above scrutiny. For 3 months, she lived a double life. By day, she was Mrs. Sterling, organizing charity galas, advising her son on his college applications, and having placid dinners with her husband, where he would lie about his day. By night, she would sit in her study, the door locked, poring over encrypted files sent by her team, tracing the tangled web of shell corporations and offshore accounts that Richard had spun. It was worse than she could have ever imagined. He wasn't just hiding money for his flings. He was systematically siphoning funds from Sterling. Consolidated the company she had helped build from a single failing restaurant. He was creating a shadow empire, a second life for himself, funded by their shared one. The real discovery, the one that changed everything, came not from a computer screen, but from a dusty safe in the basement of their Upper East Side townhouse. It was his father's old safe, a relic Richard kept for sentimental reasons. He'd forgotten the combination years ago. But Vivian hadn't. She remembered everything. The combination was the date of their first major success, 08/14/98. The day they secured the loan for their first hotel. Inside, beneath yellowed photographs and his late father's war medals, was a worn, dark blue passport. It was not American. It was a Canadian passport, issued 15 years ago and renewed 5 years prior. The photo was undeniably Richard, but the name was not. Robert Miller. Her breath caught in her throat. It wasn't just a fake ID. With the passport was a birth certificate for a Robert Miller, born in a small, forgotten town in Saskatchewan. There were bank statements from a Cayman Islands bank, all in the name of Robert Miller. And there was a deed to a holding company, Miller Holdings Limited, which, according to the documents, was the sole owner of vast undeclared assets, a vineyard in Napa, a penthouse in Miami, a portfolio of stocks worth tens of millions. This was the core of his betrayal. He hadn't just cheated on her, he had erased her. The assets in Miller Holdings weren't siphoned from their company's profits. They were purchased with the proceeds from the sale of properties and assets that Vivian herself had acquired and developed under the Sterling Consolidated umbrella, which he had secretly sold off and laundered through the Miller identity. He had been stealing their shared past to build himself a separate future. The name Richard Sterling, the powerful tycoon, was the public-facing entity. Robert Miller, the man from nowhere, was where the real money, the untethered wife-free money, was hidden. Now, standing in the cold silence of the storage facility, Vivian held the key to Unit 7B. Her accountants had traced the original ownership documents for 3 of those secretly sold properties to this very facility. Richard thought the paper records were worthless junk. He was wrong. She slid the heavy door open. Inside were dozens of bankers' boxes. She knew exactly which ones to look for. Working with quiet efficiency, she located the original deeds of sale for the properties in question. Each one bore her signature as a co-owner. Then she found the subsequent transfer documents, the ones that moved the properties into a new holding company before they were sold off. These documents, she noted with a cold knot in her stomach, bore her signature, a clumsy forgery, lacking the distinctive flourish on the E. The same flourish that was now holding up his Singapore deal. He had been doing this for years. She packed the documents into a briefcase. She had everything. The passport under his real hidden name. Proof of the shadow company. And now the original deeds and the forged transfer documents proving his theft was not just immoral, but unequivocally criminal. As she locked the storage unit, her phone buzzed. It was her investigator. "He's not in Singapore, Mrs. Sterling. The jet's transponder was offline for maintenance, but a charter pilot I have on my payroll just confirmed a drop-off. A couple matching their description. 4 seasons. Bora Bora." Vivian closed her eyes for a brief moment. Bora Bora. The place they were supposed to go for their 25th anniversary next year. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. She took a deep, steadying breath. The plan had been to wait until he returned to confront him in the cold light of New York. But this changed things. An ambush in paradise was far more fitting. He had gone there to feel powerful and untouchable. She would go there to show him and his little plaything what real power looked like. "Thank you, David," she said, her voice betraying no emotion. "Book me the next flight out of JFK to Papeete, first class, and arrange a seaplane transfer. I want to be there by morning." She disconnected the call and looked at the briefcase in her hand. It didn't just contain papers. It contained the complete and total dismantling of Richard Sterling. For years, she had been the silent partner, the woman behind the man. Now she was about to become the woman who took everything back. For the first 48 hours, Chloe believed she was living in a fairy tale. The villa, the champagne, the private yacht excursions. It was a life ripped from the pages of a magazine, and she was the star. But by the 3rd day, the fairy tale began to show its cracks. The trouble started with the Singapore deal. Richard's mood, which had soured after the call with his CFO, never truly recovered. He became withdrawn, constantly attached to his satellite phone, his conversations sharp and clipped. The charming, attentive benefactor was replaced by a stressed, irritable businessman who just happened to be in paradise. He started treating her less like a treasured companion and more like a decorative nuisance. When she tried to ask what was wrong, he waved her away. You wouldn't understand. When she tried to initiate affection, he would tolerate it for a moment, before turning back to his work, his mind clearly thousands of miles away. The illusion of a romantic escape was crumbling, revealing the stark reality of their transaction. She was the entertainment, and when the client was no longer entertained, her role became awkward and uncertain. One afternoon, as she was trying to get the perfect photo of a black-tipped reef shark from their deck, she overheard him shouting into the phone. "What do you mean, refused to sign?" he snarled. "Did you tell her what's at stake?" Chloe froze, sinking down behind the large potted palm on the deck. "Put pressure on her." "Marcus." Richard continued, his voice tight with fury. "Remind her that half of her net worth is tied up in this company. If this deal goes south, she goes down with me." There was a pause. Chloe could imagine the man on the other end speaking. "Don't you dare tell me to be reasonable." Richard exploded. "That woman hasn't been reasonable in 10 years. She's a calculating machine." Fine, I'll handle it when I get back. Just stall them." He ended the call with a vicious jab at the screen and hurled the expensive satellite phone onto a cushioned sofa. He stood with his back to her, his hands on his hips, breathing heavily. He looked smaller, less like the powerful titan she bragged about to her friends, and more like a cornered animal. Chloe felt a chill that had nothing to do with the sea breeze. He was talking about his wife. Vivian. Chloe had always pictured her as a frumpy older woman who was content to live off her husband's success. But the woman Richard was describing, a calculating machine who had the power to scuttle a 9-figure deal, sounded nothing like that. For the first time, it occurred to Chloe that she had no real idea who Vivian Sterling was. She was just a name, a ghost that was tacitly understood to be part of the arrangement, but never mentioned. Later that evening, Richard tried to apologize for his mood. He opened a bottle of vintage Dom Perignon and ordered a lavish seafood platter to the villa. He put on a show of being the charming host again, but his eyes were distant, his smile strained. "I'm sorry, darling," he said, topping up her glass. "This deal is just complicated. High stakes. It's making me tense." "It's okay, Ricky," Chloe said, trying to sound breezy and unconcerned. But the overheard conversation had planted a seed of doubt. She wasn't just his beautiful escape. She was an active part of his betrayal of a woman who was clearly a formidable force in his life. "You mentioned your wife. Is she the one causing the trouble?" The question hung in the air instantly, shattering the fragile truce. Richard's face hardened. The forced smile vanished. "We don't talk about her," he said, his voice dangerously low. "Ever. Understand, I just thought—" "You thought wrong," he snapped. He stood up his chair, scraping loudly against the wooden deck. "You are here to be a pleasant distraction, Chloe, to help me relax. You are not here to get involved in my business or my family. That is the arrangement. If you can't stick to it, this little vacation ends right now." The words hit her like a slap, a pleasant distraction. The arrangement. All the romantic illusions she had built up in her mind, that he was falling for her, that he might one day leave his wife, that she was more than just a beautiful girl he was renting. All of it collapsed into a pile of ugly transactional dust. She was a service he had procured, and he was reminding her of the terms and conditions. Tears welled in her eyes, born of humiliation more than heartbreak. "I'm sorry," she whispered, looking down at her plate. Richard sighed a long, exasperated sound. He ran a hand through his hair. "Look, just finish your champagne. I'm going for a walk." He left without another word, stalking down the boardwalk toward the main resort, leaving her alone with the opulent feast and the crushing weight of his words. Chloe sat there, the bubbles in her glass going flat. She looked around at the picture-perfect villa, the endless ocean, the star-filled sky. It was all a beautiful, expensive stage set. And she had just been reminded that she was nothing more than a temporary player, easily replaced in a drama far more complex and serious than she had ever imagined. The paradise he had promised her now felt like a prison, and she was suddenly desperately afraid of the real star of the show, the woman whose name was Forbidden Vivian. The morning air was thick with the scent of tiara flowers and salt. Richard had returned late the previous night, his mood no better. They had slept in the same bed, like two strangers, a canyon of unspoken resentment between them. Now, he sat on the deck, nursing a strong black coffee, trying to strategize. He would have to cut the trip short, go back to New York, and force Vivian's hand. He would threaten, cajole, bribe, whatever it took. He wouldn't let her destroy this deal. Chloe was inside, pointedly packing a few of her things into a suitcase, a piece of passive-aggressive theater he chose to ignore. The silence was heavy, broken only by the gentle lapping of the lagoon against the villa's stilts. It was then that he heard it. The low, whirring sound of an approaching engine. Not one of the resort's boats, but the distinct thrum of a seaplane. It was unusual for one to land so close to the private villas. He stood up, shielding his eyes against the morning glare, and watched as the plane gracefully touched down on the water, 100 yards away. A resort tender immediately sped out to meet it. He thought little of it, assuming it was a new guest with a flair for the dramatic. He was about to turn away when he saw the figure disembarking. Even from a distance, the silhouette was unmistakable. The posture, the elegant line of the shoulders, the deliberate, unhurried way she moved. It couldn't be. His blood ran cold. The coffee cup slipped from his fingers, shattering on the deck, the dark liquid spreading like a stain. "No," he whispered. The tender cut its engine at the dock of Villa 107. The staff helped the passenger onto the boardwalk. She was dressed in crisp white linen trousers and a navy blue silk blouse, her dark hair pulled back in a severe, elegant chignon. She wore dark sunglasses, but he didn't need to see her eyes. He knew the cold fire that would be in them. It was Vivian. Chloe came out onto the deck, drawn by the sound of the shattering cup. "What was that, Ricky, what's—" Her voice trailed off as she followed his gaze. She saw the woman walking towards them, her expression a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. Vivian walked with the unshakable calm of a monarch, surveying her territory. She didn't stumble on the uneven wood. She didn't rush. Each step was a beat in a funeral march for the life Richard had created here. She reached the deck of the villa and paused at the top of the short steps, her shadow falling over them. She slowly removed her sunglasses, and her eyes, cool grey and utterly devoid of emotion, landed on Richard. She ignored Chloe completely, as if she were a piece of furniture, a part of the scenery that didn't warrant a second glance. "Hello, Richard," she said, her voice perfectly level, carrying easily in the still morning air. "I believe you're in the wrong city. The Singapore conference seems to have been relocated." Richard's mind raced, cycling through 1,000 lies, 1,000 excuses. but his tongue felt thick and useless. He was caught. So completely, so utterly caught, that denial was pointless. All he could muster was a strangled Vivian. "What are you doing here?" "An excellent question," she replied, her gaze finally flicking to Chloe. A brief, dismissive assessment. Chloe flinched instinctively, crossing her arms over her chest, suddenly feeling cheap and exposed in her tiny bikini. "I could ask you the same thing, but I'm not here for a post-mortem of our marriage. I'm here on business." "Business?" Richard scoffed, a flicker of his old arrogance returning. He tried to seize control of the situation. "This is hardly the place. Whatever you have to say can wait until I get back to New York." "This is inappropriate." "Inappropriate," Vivian echoed, a small, mirthless smile touching her lips. She took a step onto the deck. "You want to talk about inappropriate, Richard? Let's talk about forgery. Let's talk about fraudulent conveyance. Let's talk about the Singapore deal you're trying to push through with my forged signature." Richard paled. This wasn't just about the affair. She knew about the deal. She knew about the signature. "How I don't know what you're talking about," he blustered, but his voice lacked conviction. Vivian simply shook her head, as if disappointed in a child's clumsy lie. "Please don't insult my intelligence. We're so far beyond that now." She stepped past him, her expensive leather handbag swinging at her side. She surveyed the scene, the shattered coffee cup, the half-eaten breakfast, the frightened-looking girl in the bikini. Her eyes were like those of a building inspector, condemning the entire shoddy structure. "You should have Chloe pack her things," Vivian said, her voice dropping to a confidential, almost bored tone. "Actually have her pack your things as well. You won't be staying here tonight. The villa is booked in my name from this afternoon. I had the reservation transferred this morning. It's a sterling consolidated corporate account, after all. Our account." The sheer audacity of it left Richard speechless. She had not only found him, but she was methodically evicting him from his own fantasy. Chloe, who had been frozen in place, finally found her voice. "Who do you think you are?" she stammered, a pathetic attempt at defiance. Vivian turned to her, her expression not angry, but pitying. "My dear, it's not about who I think I am. It's about who my husband isn't. And that's something you're about to learn. Now, if you'll excuse us, Richard and I have something very important to discuss. It's about a man named Robert Miller." At the mention of that name, every last drop of color drained from Richard's face. It wasn't just an ambush, it was an execution. And Vivian had just revealed she held the axe. The name hung in the humid air, heavier and more threatening than the gathering storm clouds on the horizon. Robert Miller. It was a ghost, a secret buried so deep Richard had begun to believe it didn't exist. To hear it spoken here in this place from Vivian's lips was so jarring it felt like a physical blow. His carefully constructed world, already fractured now, simply vaporized. I don't," he began, but the words died in his throat. "Stop, Richard," Vivian said, her voice cutting through his feeble attempt at denial. She unclasped her Hermes handbag, and from it she withdrew a single object, a dark blue Canadian passport. She didn't throw it at him. She didn't wave it in his face. She placed it on the glass patio table with a quiet, definitive click. "Let's dispense with the theater." Chloe stared at the passport, then at Richard's ashen face. "What is that? Who is Robert Miller?" Richard ignored her, his eyes locked on the passport, as if it were a venomous snake. "Where did you get that?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. "From your father's safe," Vivian replied calmly. "The one you thought you'd forgotten the combination to. You forget Richard. I was there when you set it, the day we bought our first restaurant. 08 to 14, 98. I forget nothing." She let that sink in, the reminder of their shared history, the history he had tried to steal and erase. "This," she said, tapping a perfectly manicured finger on the passport, "is more than just a travel document. It's the key to everything you've hidden from me, from our family, from our company. Robert Miller, born in Weyburn, Saskatchewan. The boy who ran away from a dirt-poor farm at 17 with nothing but a fake name and a desperate ambition. The boy who became Richard Sterling." Chloe gasped, staring at Richard as if seeing him for the first time. The suave, powerful billionaire was a construct, a brand. "This isn't just about you hiding your humble origins." Vivian continued, her voice like a surgeon's scalpel, precise and cold. "This is about fraud. For the last 15 years, Robert Miller has been very busy. He's been opening bank accounts in the Cayman Islands. He's been founding shell corporations. And most importantly, he's been buying assets. My assets. Our assets." She reached into her bag again and pulled out a slim file folder. She opened it on the table next to the passport. Inside were copies of deeds, bank statements, and flow charts that mapped out a dizzying web of transactions. The vineyard in Napa that you told me we lost money on and had to unload for a loss, Robert Miller bought it a week later for pennies on the dollar through a shell company. The commercial property in Soho you claimed was a tax liability. It was transferred to Miller Holdings and now generates 7 figures a year in rent. The list goes on, Richard. For years you've been using your real identity to steal from your fake one." She looked directly at him, and for the first time he saw not just anger in her eyes, but a profound, weary contempt. "The affair. Chloe," she said, gesturing vaguely in the girl's direction, without looking at her. "Honestly, Richard, that's just a symptom of your pathetic midlife crisis. It's insulting, but it's mundane. This," she tapped the folder again, "this is the real adultery. You betrayed our partnership. You took the life we built together piece by piece, and you tried to hide it away for yourself." Richard finally found his voice, a desperate, rasping sound. "You can't prove anything. It's my word against yours. Those are just papers." "Are they?" Vivian's smile was chilling. "My forensic accounting team, which has been on your tail for 3 months, would disagree. So would Julian Croft, the head of litigation at Sullivan and Cromwell, who I retained 8 weeks ago. They found the original deeds in our New Jersey archives, the ones with my real signature, and then they found the forged transfer documents you used to move the assets. The forgery is good, Richard, but it's not perfect. You could never get the flourish on the E quite right. The same little problem that's holding up your Singapore deal right now." The final piece clicked into place. She hadn't just discovered his past. She had methodically, brilliantly, and silently cornered him. Every move he thought he was making in secret, she had been watching. Every lie he told, she had been documenting. He sank into a chair, the fight draining out of him. He was no longer a titan of industry. He was Robert Miller from Saskatchewan, a petty thief caught with his hand in the cookie jar. Chloe, who had been listening with a look of growing horror, finally spoke. "So, the money? It's not all yours?" she asked, her voice small. The question was so naive, so pathetically self-interested that Vivian almost laughed. "Oh, my dear girl," Vivian said, finally turning to face her fully. "You have a fundamental misunderstanding of the situation. There is no his money. There is no my money. There is only our money. And the man you know as Richard Sterling is about to find out that his access to it has just been permanently revoked. Every account, every asset, every credit line in the name of Richard Sterling or Robert Miller has been frozen by court order as of an hour ago. Julian filed the injunction this morning in New York." Richard lunged to his feet. "You what? You can't do that. You'll destroy the company. You'll destroy everything." "No, Richard," Vivian said, standing to face him, her voice ringing with an authority he had never heard before. "You destroyed everything when you decided our partnership was a bank you could rob. I am saving the company. I am saving our children's legacy from the man who was willing to gamble it all away for a second life with this." She gave Chloe another withering glance. "As of this morning, the board has been notified of your fraudulent activities. I have invoked the emergency clause in our shareholder agreement. You have been removed as CEO of Sterling Consolidated. I have been appointed interim CEO. The Singapore deal is dead. Your life as you know it is over." She picked up the Robert Miller passport from the table and held it out to him. "This is all you have left. The identity you cherished so much in secret. You're free to use it. But I should warn you. The moment you try to access any of Robert Miller's accounts, you'll trigger an international fraud alert. Robert Miller is a wanted man. Richard Sterling is just a broke, disgraced philanderer. Choose your poison." The silence that followed Vivian's declaration was absolute. The world had been reduced to the confines of the villa's deck, and within that space a king had been deposed, Richard Sterling. The man who commanded boardrooms and moved markets stood there utterly stripped of his power, his face a mask of disbelief and impotent rage. Chloe was the first to react. The intricate fantasy she had built around Richard, the powerful protector, the ticket to a life of endless luxury, had been demolished. She looked at him, truly looked at him, and saw not a billionaire, but a fraud. A man named Robert Miller, from a town she'd never heard of. A man who was, according to the terrifyingly calm woman in front of her, broke. Her survival instincts, honed by years of navigating a world that valued beauty and proximity to power above all else, kicked into high gear. This ship was sinking, and she had no intention of going down with it. She took a hesitant step away from Richard, creating a visible and symbolic distance between them. Her voice, when she spoke, was no longer defiant but shaky and pleading, directed entirely at Vivian. I didn't know," she said, her eyes wide with a performance of pure innocence. "He told me he was separated. He said it was just a matter of paperwork. I had no idea about any of this. This other name, the money, I swear." Vivian looked at her, her expression unreadable. She neither believed nor disbelieved her. Chloe was simply a piece of collateral damage, and Vivian had no time for her. "Whether you knew or not is irrelevant to me," Vivian said coolly. "Your arrangement was with him. I suggest you take it up with Robert." The use of his old name was another deliberate twist of the knife. Richard, seeing Chloe's defection, finally snapped out of his stupor. "You little snake," he snarled at her. "Don't you dare play the victim here." He then turned his fury back to Vivian. "This is insane. You can't do this, Vivian. 25 years. We built this together. You would tear it all down out of spite over this This girl. You still don't get it, do you? Vivian said, shaking her head in genuine wonder at his denseness. This stopped being about her the moment I found this passport. This is about you stealing from our children. This is about you forging my name to cover your tracks. This is about you trying to build a new life on the foundations of the one I sacrificed my own career to help you build. The girl is just a symptom of the disease, Richard. The disease is your pathological greed and ego. Desperation began to replace his anger. He took a step towards her, his hands outstretched in a gesture of appeal. Ellie, please, he begged, using the pet name he hadn't used in a decade. We can fix this. I can call it off. I'll give it all back. The accounts, the properties, everything. I'll end it with her. We can go back to how things were. The plea was so pathetic, so utterly disconnected from the reality of the situation that Vivian could only stare at him. Go back. There is no going back. You think this is a negotiation. You think after all this I would ever trust you again. You think I could ever look at you and not see a common thief who happened to share my bed. Then what do you want? He cried, his voice cracking. Revenge. Do you want to see me in jail? Jail is a distinct possibility, Vivian replied evenly. My lawyers have prepared a criminal complaint. Forgery, wire fraud, embezzlement. It's quite a list. But I'm not sure prison would serve any real purpose. It would create a scandal that would harm the company, and more importantly, our children. A flicker of hope ignited in Richard's eyes. So, you won't press charges, I haven't decided, she said, letting him hang on the precipice. My decision will be based entirely on your cooperation from this moment forward. She walked over to the edge of the deck and looked out at the tranquil lagoon, her back to him. The power dynamic was absolute. She was the judge, the jury, and the executioner, and he was the broken man pleading for his life. Chloe, meanwhile, was quietly and quickly moving back inside the villa. She wasn't just packing her own things now. She was gathering anything of value that wasn't nailed down a Patek Philippe watch. Richard had gifted her a pair of diamond earrings, the cash from his wallet on the nightstand. She was salvaging what she could from the wreckage. She had allied herself with a fraud, and her only thought now was to escape before she too was held accountable for his sins. Richard watched his wife's back, his mind reeling. He had always seen her as his partner, yes, but also as a component of his life, a reliable, stable, but ultimately subordinate part of the Richard Sterling machine. He had never in all their years together seen her as his superior. He had never imagined she possessed this capacity for ruthless strategic warfare. He had underestimated her so profoundly, it had cost him everything. What are your terms, Vivian? He asked, his voice a defeated whisper. What do you want from me? Vivian turned around slowly, her face set like stone. The final checkmate was about to be declared. Vivian looked at the man she had spent more than half her life with. The bluster, the arrogance, the aura of invincibility, it had all been stripped away, leaving behind a desperate, hollowed-out shell. She felt no pity, only a grim sense of finality. My terms are not negotiable, Richard, she began, her voice calm and absolute. They are the conditions for my silence on your criminal activities, and for the pittance I am willing to let you walk away with. She laid them out with the dispassionate clarity of a CEO dictating a memo. First, you will sign a post-nuptial agreement drafted by my lawyer that relinquishes all claims to any and all assets held by Sterling, consolidated the Sterling family trust, and any personal property currently in my name. You will effectively be writing yourself out of the empire we built. You will walk away with nothing from our shared life." Richard's mouth opened, but no words came out. Nothing. "Second," she continued undeterred, "you will sign an irrevocable transfer of all assets held under the name Robert Miller. The bank accounts, the properties, the stock portfolio into a blind trust for James and Olivia. You stole from their future, and now you will restore it. You will not be a trustee. You will have no access and no oversight. It will be their inheritance protected from you." "Vivian." "That's everything," he rasped. "You're leaving me with nothing. I'm leaving you with your freedom, which is more than you deserve," she retorted sharply. "Which brings me to my third condition. You will cede full sole custody of the children to me. They are both nearly adults, but the legal standing matters. You will see them only when and if they choose to see you. I will not have you poisoning them with your lies, or trying to use them as leverage against me." At that moment, Chloe emerged from the villa dragging her suitcase. Her face was tear-streaked, but determined. She didn't look at Richard. She addressed Vivian. "I've called a resort boat," she said quietly. "It's on its way. I just want to leave." Vivian gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. A wise decision. Chloe hurried past them, a refugee fleeing a war zone she had helped start. Richard watched her go, a final pathetic symbol of his downfall, and then turned back to Vivian. The fight was gone. He was beaten. And what about me? He asked the question, laced with a self-pity that disgusted her. Where do I go? What do I do? That Richard is no longer my concern, she said. I am, however, feeling generous. Once all the papers are signed, I will authorize a one-time severance payment to you, a final transfer from an account I control. $5 million. He stared at her. $5 million was a fortune to most, but to a man who had commanded billions, it was pocket change. It was an insult. That's it. That's it, she affirmed. It's enough to start a new life, a small one. Perhaps Robert Miller can open a modest diner in Saskatchewan. Go back to your roots. The documents are with my lawyer at the hotel in Papeete. A car will be here in 1 hour to take you to the dock for the transfer. You will go there, you will sign everything without argument, and then you will disappear. If you refuse, or if you try to fight me on any of this, I will call Julian, and he will file the criminal complaint. The FBI and the IRS will be notified about Robert Miller, and you will likely spend the next decade in a federal prison. The choice is yours. She turned to leave her part in this drama complete. Ellie, wait, he called out, his voice cracking with a final desperate plea. Why? After everything? Why do this? Vivian stopped and looked back at him, her expression softening for just a fraction of a second, not with pity, but with a deep, ancient sadness. You know, for months I thought I was doing this for revenge, she said softly. But standing here watching you, I realize that's not it. I'm not destroying you, Richard. I'm simply revealing what was already there. A hollow man who valued money more than family and secrets more than truth. I'm not doing this to you. I'm doing this for me, for our children. I'm taking back the life you tried to steal. I'm saving the legacy you were too reckless to protect. Without another word, she walked away down the boardwalk, never once looking back. She left him standing on the deck of a paradise that had become his personal hell, holding a passport to a life of exile. He was no longer Richard Sterling, the millionaire. He was just Robert Miller, a man with a small severance package and a past that had finally caught up with him. Vivian stepped onto the waiting resort boat. As it pulled away, she looked back not at the villa where her husband stood defeated, but out at the vast open ocean. The storm clouds were breaking, and the sun was beginning to shine through. It felt like a new beginning. Her new beginning. In the end, this wasn't just a story about infidelity. It was a story about identity betrayal and the quiet, calculating power of a woman who was pushed too far. Vivian Sterling didn't just get revenge. She reclaimed her life and her legacy, proving that the silent partner is often the one with the most strength. She dismantled her husband's empire, not with tears or shouting, but with intelligence, patience, and a single passport that held the key to his entire web of lies. Richard thought he could have it all: the wife, the mistress, the secret life, but he forgot that the woman who helped build his throne was the only one who knew exactly how to topple it. What would you have done in Vivian's shoes? Was her response a masterclass in justice, or was it a cold, calculated revenge? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of calculated justice and ultimate empowerment resonated with you, show your support by hitting that like button, sharing it with someone who needs to see that strength comes in many forms, and be sure to subscribe for more true-life dramas where the truth always finds its way to the surface. Thank you for listening.